With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu. At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
What we want is to have an entertaining series.
Yeah.
With interesting characters.
Yeah.
That people like.
Yeah.
And care about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the early days of television, there really were no kids shows. And for Shari to come along, have puppets, comedy, I just knew this was different.
What's that?
What's what?
That thing.
That's a camera.
Wow.
She made sure you wanted to love those characters.
Shari was able to speak to issues controversial for a woman in that era.
You can't be the president. Why not? You're a girl.
As a kid, if you saw Shari Lewis on TV, you fell in love.
It was so clear. I had found myself with Lamb Chop.
After all, Lamb Chop, what am I without you? Nothing.
I feel the same way about you.
But there's only room for one son. And Lamb Chop became a big star. Mom wanted to be seen as more than a one-trick pony. And the audience were like, that's nice, where's Lamb Chop?
But there was a time when people didn't want Shari Lewis.
When my show was canceled, it was the only time I ever went to Lamb Chop and cried with her.
Those years where she did not have a show, I think that was a very lonely, horrible time for her. She did whatever came up to rebuild her career. It was in her DNA.
Are you all right?
She was a fighter. And not getting it all gives you that fight.
There were a lot of kids who had very unhappy childhoods, and their oasis was this loving adult who accepted you.
No matter how little you are, you can still be a big help to a friend in need.
You create confident and curious human beings by showing them how to do something and then applauding their success.
I can, and I will.
Okay, good.
I was just having fun watching these brilliant characters teach me.
I think it's called self-esteem, and it is the most important lesson for children to get.
And just remember to make yourself as good as you can be.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with Lisa D'Appolito, all about her new documentary, Shari and Lamb Chop. Yes, it is a story of Shari Lewis and her puppet Lamb Chop, entertaining children and adults for decades. Great documentary, really shines light on someone who I was not aware of just how amazing they are, how talented, and how much of a born entertainer. We had Lisa on the show a few years ago as she was talking about her Gilda Radner documentary. She's back with another solid doc. Highly recommended. Be sure to check that out if it comes to your town, and I hope you enjoy this interview. How did the Shari Lewis project come about for you?
After Gilda, I had a list of inspiring women.
I was looking for another inspiring woman, like an unsung hero whose story I felt need to be told. And Shari wasn't actually even on my list, but I had become friends with Gene Wilder's nephew. And he had a production company, and he called me up, and one of his producers had met Mallory, Shari's daughter. And he said, would you be interested in Shari Lewis and Lamb Chop? Shari Lewis, because he knew I was looking for a project. And I was like, Lamb Chop. And I got all excited. And I didn't really know much about Shari. And then I started doing the research on her. And she was definitely an unsung hero. So that's kind of how that came about.
What's your experience with Lamb Chop when you were growing up?
Well, that was the weird thing is I didn't have either of the two shows. I was also in between. So I didn't watch the Shari Lewis show and I didn't watch Lamb Chop's play along. I was like in the middle. But somehow I always knew Lamb Chop. And I always loved Lamb Chop. And somehow I had like Lamb Chop stuff, like still. So I love Lamb Chop, though I had not thought about Lamb Chop. But, hearing the name Lamb Chop, I just got excited. But I didn't watch her or anything on television. But I did see, Shari would be on talk shows and Hollywood Squares and things like that. But I just always still love Lamb Chop.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I was between the two shows, but she just seemed like such a part of pop culture. It was impossible to escape, not that I wanted to.
It's interesting because she had, a very big gap in her real career, though she was always working and always doing stuff.
And I'll be honest, I had no idea about that older career, just when she started off, and she's such a born entertainer. It was amazing to see, even at such a young age, that she was just ready for the stage.
Yeah. Yeah. That was really interesting that she grew up, in a vaudeville environment, with two parents who were teachers, but music and magic and vaudeville. And that was always a part of her life, and dance.
Oh, yeah. Lots and lots of dance. And to see her with that Fred Astaire puppet, that was insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. There, you can't put every story in the film, but there were stories that people would tell about, that was a life-size, like 6 feet tall Fred Astaire or 5 something. And he would be like in a coffin case, like that. They traveled around with him and people thought like, not a puppet in there, as you can imagine.
When you got the suggestion of Shari Lewis, did you just immediately go, oh, yeah, that sounds great? Or did you have to do a little pre-search before you even said, there's a project here?
I had to do some work to figure out what it was. And the first thing I came across was the New York Times obituary for her father, Abe Hurwitz, who was the official magician of New York City. So that kind of drew me in because I was like, wait, what? There's an official magician. And that was sort of kind of what started getting me is the background and what she came from. And then as I started to research, I felt it was a real comeback story for Shari, kind of like Hacks in a way, like that she was just determined to get back on television and it took her decades, but she did. And she was in her 60s and she's singing and dancing and kicking up her legs and doing splits and upside down. And I think that was really inspiring to me. So I think after some research, I realized that to me, it was like a comeback story.
So when you said, okay, this is going to be my next project, how do you go about even starting to organize all this?
Oh, well, there was this, as opposed to Gilda. With Gilda, it was just me and I was a production company. So there's a production company behind us and there were more resources to organize things. But Shari had a history of 50 years in entertainment. So there was a lot to go through. So I think with my amazing editor, Andrea, who started looking at the material in a new eye, we started to organize and we started to see that Shari really started to talk through her puppets. Like there were some really interesting things that no one talked about. It never came up, but Andrea has started seeing it in the material. So that's how we started to organize it, as a sort of linear doc, but with the idea that Shari used her puppets to tell her story.
With all of that historical footage, where did you manage to find all that at? Is there like a Shari Lewis archive?
The great thing is that David Copperfield when Shari, somehow David Copperfield got all of Shari's archives and they weren't organized in any way. So we had a truck go to Las Vegas, pick up all her tapes and her collections and her stuff. And we brought it to Shari's daughter's house, Mallory. And I just started going through it. And then we started transferring things, and not everything came from there. Some things came from her assistants and some things came from different places. But that was a good, it had every Shari Lewis show in there. It had every Lamb Chop's play along. It had articles and articles. And so there was a lot of that.
How was Mallory to work with on this project?
Well, she's great. She's great. She does lamb chops. So basically that's how Mallory had approval over who the director would be. So she came, she was talking to people and she came to New York and she interviewed me, and then Lamb Chop interviewed me, which at first is like a little, but then you get used to Lamb Chop. But Lamb Chop liked me, so I got the job.
Did she ask those kind of weird interview questions, like what's your strongest weakness, some of those things, or like what's that interview process like?
She said she did her research and she looked at all my interviews online. And she said, tell me something that I wouldn't know by watching your interviews. And I told her something, and we had the same thing in common, and we just kind of bonded over that. I'm very comfortable with her to be able to tell her things that I normally wouldn't say to other people.
Now, is that Mallory or is that Lamb Chop?
Mallory.
Okay. All right. I was just curious.
Yeah. It's actually easier to talk to Mallory than Lamb Chop, to be honest.
Bet. Yeah. I've not been interviewed by puppets, but I've talked with some people that feel like total Muppets.
Yeah.
Your editing is so great. Andrew did such a wonderful job. And I love how sometimes the footage will comment on itself or comment on the documentary itself. It's almost like Shari is a voice inside of the film, or Lamb Chop talking about the things that we've just seen.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't really think about it that way, but that's all Andrea, her, editing taste and her style. And we had a really great working relationship.
What were some of the parts of the story that you wanted to get to, but weren't able to just because you can't make a 10-hour documentary?
Well, one thing I totally regret that we didn't put in, because nobody talked about it and it somehow didn't fit in, and then we forgot, was that Shari had written an episode of Star Trek.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
I'm like so mad that I didn't put it in. I don't know how. I remember thinking we should put this in, and I remember Andrea saying, well, no one talks about it, and it wasn't coming in, like it wasn't fitting into where things were fitting in. But I regretted that I didn't do that like that, because it is such a big thing. I didn't put that in, and I regret that. And then there's a puppet that I love called Mr. Person, which was a Captain Person, which was a kangaroo. He never made it in either.
I was aware of Lamb Chop, but I wasn't aware of all of the other puppets. And just that, like they were saying in the interview, that I think it might be Charlie Rose that she's talking to, about how the puppets are different facets of her personality. That was fascinating.
Yeah, it was a different interview, and I can't remember his name and I should go look it up, because he was the best interviewer of everybody. When I found that interview, it was the insights to Shari that I didn't get from any other interview, because she was very, Shari was very conscious of what she looked like, what she talked like, what her persona was. So that was a really good interview, because he got into her and she felt comfortable enough. It was during the time she was having problems with her husband. So I think more vulnerable than she normally would have been.
The whole thing with her marriage was so fascinating, and just such an undercurrent going through everything.
Shari has a lot of lessons, I think, in her life, like, that people have marriage problems, people have problems with their children, they have health problems, but it's really like getting through it and with a good attitude, and that everybody has these problems, but, you can get through it. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is such a great structure to her life and to her story, where you have that initial success and that comeback at the end, but those days in the wilderness where you're saying like, oh, here she is in this movie, here she is in this television special. That was some of the most fascinating stuff, just how she kept her name alive and kept her personality out there.
Yeah, and she would still, she would go to these fairs, and if 4 people showed up, she would still, she always appreciated her audience, no matter how many there were or who they were. She just loved performing and entertaining people.
Well, and then also educator as well, which was just so great to see the way that she worked with kids.
Both her father being a math professor and her mother being a music teacher. I think she grew up with teachers in the family, and they both her father used magic to teach children math. So I think there was just always, teaching was always part of it. And I think all her early shows, her dad entertained children. So I think all her early shows, there was sort of an entertainment, they called it, entertainment.
So when did you actually start on this project?
Right before COVID.
How did that affect you? I'm sure that must have made interviews almost impossible.
Yeah, it was difficult. I waited for Canada the second the border opened up, went and flew there. It's hard to interview people, especially older people, when you're wearing a mask. So that was a lot of, it didn't really stop us, but it made it more difficult.
Well, I could see the old footage being such a boon to this, but yeah, without those interviews, and those interviews are wonderful. And I do love her daughter's voice, her family's voice, David Copperfield's voice. And just how did you even decide, when it came to people outside of that circle, who you were going to talk to?
Her family, obviously, her sister, her cousin Eli is one of my favorites, who's in the film. And then David Copperfield represents the magic part. And then finding young ventriloquists who are influenced by Shari. And then Sarah Sherman, the comedian from SNL, was a find out of nowhere, because somebody said, "Oh, look, on Instagram, she posted her lamb chop tattoo." So that was kind of I wasn't looking for a comedian who had a lamb chop tattoo, but that seemed to just happen.
That was such a wonderful moment in the movie. Her voice just really added a lot, which I'm not even that familiar with her on SNL, but she just really brought a lot to that. And yeah, David Copperfield's stuff was just incredible. And I was I've never really seen him interviewed about somebody else other than him.
He loves Shari. He had a crush on her watching her, and then he was able to meet her later in life, and they had a lot in common, their work ethic, because Shari is the worker, and so is David. So they talked a lot about their philosophy on, really working hard. And I think that's, Shari's message really is you work hard. You want. And I think David was like that too. And David had wanted to be a ventriloquist when he was young.
Yeah, I really appreciate too that you give a nice little history of ventriloquism and just where it was at when it comes to vaudeville and entertainment. It still is a marvel to me that Edgar Bergen was on the radio.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it?
But to see Mortimer Snerd and Lamb Chop together, that was really nice.
That came from an event that Shari was definitely the only woman in the show, and there were several male, and Lamb Chop was the only puppet. Everything else was a big dummy. But Lamb Chop could hold her own.
Oh yeah, well, and Shari could hold her own, and just her being such a maverick when it came to breaking into a male-dominated field.
Yeah. Well, I think, she says in the film that, she was raised sort of it didn't matter that she was a woman, and she said if her father had had a son, maybe things would have been different. But she was just raised, as a person.
There was one moment of footage I wanted to ask you about particularly. It feels like it's almost like B-roll or almost test footage from I think it's a Good Morning LA interview, and you're kind of off the stage and you can see the other cameras. Do you know what moment I'm talking about?
That was KTLA, or one of those shows she was on. I know, and it's spooky. It has this orange sort of thing. Yeah. So that just looked a little different, and they had some B-roll in there that I was able to use of Shari behind the chair with her puppet.
That was great. thought that was so honest and just felt so not staged. Like, of course, she knows she is a performer, so getting in front of a camera, but that just felt so natural and so behind the scenes.
I think it was rare that Shari felt that natural on shows. So like when we found the moments that she felt like she was herself, or she felt comfortable with the person, because you could see, she directs a lot of the interviews herself in some sense. Like, she doesn't want anyone to tell her anything. Like when they ask Lamb Chop how old you are, she turns it around and says what she wants to say.
To be able to use Lamb Chop to deflect or any of those other puppets, I thought was brilliant.
When Shari was going through issues with her husband, and she's on a show with Charlie horses getting, having problems and possibly getting a divorce, that's really was kind of so out of character for Shari, but often known her husband was sitting there watching, whether he was there or watching it at home.
I can't remember when she passed away.
I think it was in 1999.
Okay, so you
I'm
didn't
bad
have
with years.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to verify that you didn't actually have a chance to talk with her.
No, we used a lot. A&E had done a documentary about her. So we were able to, and the footage was at UCLA, so we were able to get all the archives and the outtakes. So that was really good. So that was a good base for us to have.
If you could have sat down with her for an interview, what would you have asked her?
I guess more about her relationship with her husband, because I think she made him a producer. Like, he was like a trust fund kid. I just wanted to know more about that. I think that personal side of things, I think I'd like to know about. I feel like I know her pretty well. Shari was a really practical person, but her husband was doing all these crazy things, and she would go along with them. And I would wonder about what her experience was like meeting, being out of her comfort zone. So I guess those are the questions I would ask her, is like, in situations where I knew she was out of her comfort zone, how did she react, or what was that like for her? Because she wasn't esoteric. She wasn't that way, but she went along. And she probably would have funny stories about things that happened to her. So I think that I would ask her.
So other than a global pandemic, what were some of the other challenges you had on this film?
With Love, Gilda, it was 100% my film. So it was really me and the editor kind of making all the decisions. In this case, there was a production company. There were investors, but the investors were great. But there was another production company. And I think that in some ways, people don't know, there's so much work that goes into making a film that you really get to know who this character is and decisions and who their life is. And so I think there were times where there were comments about trying to make a story that wasn't in there. And so I think that was a little bit hard for me, that I had to really fight with my editor for the film that we believed in and the story that we believed in. And ultimately we got, mostly what we wanted. So I think I didn't have to fight before for what I felt was right. So I think that was sort of a learning experience of really standing up for what you believe in. And, I had the Shari spirit behind me, because no one would have told Shari how to do her show or how to do anything. So I think I had that Shari inspiration behind me to really stand up and say, no, this is what the story is. And no, that's not who she was. And that's a made up situation. And there's not even material, sometimes you want, and also as a director, there's things you want too, but you don't have the resources and the content to tell that story, or that story isn't really true, but you wish it was true, and I think I try to stand behind what is true and not make up anything. So I think that was a little bit of, a conflict for me is working with people who want to create a story that isn't there and having to explain to them that, one, that's a bad idea. Two, that's not the material that's there. And three, that's not the truth. And I've heard a lot of directors have, you work with different people different ways. And And some people are easy to work with and some people, are not easy to work with. But ultimately, when the reviews come out, no one says, oh, the producer did a bad job. They always, right? They say, oh, that director did a bad film. So, you have to kind of really stick up for what you believe in. And not that I'm that way, because I'm always open to other people's opinions, and we've had rough cut screenings and see what stands out and what doesn't work. I'm always listening to audiences. If the audience doesn't think something the majority of the audience doesn't like something, that's obviously not working. And if they love it, then it's working. So I like that kind of thing.
When was the first time you got to see this with an audience?
We did 2 rough cut screenings. That was kind of, and the second rough cut screening was pretty much the film. But, it was a lot of industry people. And then at Doc NYC was where the premiere was. But, that was all of Mallory's family and my friends. So it wasn't an honest audience. It was an audience that loved us. But I think as I started going to the different festivals, I got to, see what people loved about the film. My favorite is for people who don't know who Shari is to see the film, who have no idea who she is, never heard of her, never heard of Lamb Chop. That's, and that's very rare. From most of the audiences have known them, because I guess that's why they're seeing the film. But the few people who haven't seen the film, that it moves them and is inspired by Shari is probably the best. And also some children have come to the performances. So I love their feedback on the film too.
Did I read right that you're doing a documentary about Albert Pune?
I did. It's done.
Oh, great.
So it's not a full documentary. It's a 60-minute piece. It showed at Comic-Con, and then it started going to the esoteric horror film festivals. So that's kind of where that is.
So where's the best place for people to see the Shari Lewis doc?
It opens on the 17th in New York City and on the 25th in Los Angeles. And then it's going to be available digitally. And I'm not sure where the plans are, but it should have a pretty big release after. There's the Shari and Lamb Chop Facebook page. And then 3 Faces Films is my company. So sometimes I post there too.
Dum 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 dum. Dum 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 dum.
Charlie Horse.
Dum dum.
Charlie Horse.
What is it, Shari?
What's that?
What's what?
Oh, the song you're singing. Dum 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 dum.
Just some dumb song.
Oh, why don't you sing it for us?
Oh, no, Shari, you don't want to hear that song.
Sure we do. We'll sing along with you.
Shari, you don't want to hear this song.
Come on, Charlie.
All right, but you'll be sorry.
So, make me sorry.
And he did. This is a song that doesn't end. Yep, it goes on and on, my friend. Some people started singing it, not knowing what it was. And they'll continue singing it forever just because this is a song that doesn't end.
Oh, no.
Yes, it goes on and on, my friend.
That's enough, guys.
Some people started singing it, not knowing what it was. And they'll continue singing it forever.